Times and USC's Dornsife Center for the Political Future. Now, live from the campus of USC at Bovard Auditorium, here is Fox 11's Elex Michaelson and the Los Angeles Times' Erika D. Smith.
And welcome inside the auditorium here at Bovard at USC, and welcome to the Los Angeles mayoral debate.
Yes, welcome. Thank you all for coming. I want to introduce our candidates who were determined by the latest LA Times Berkeley poll. We're going to start to our left. We have Joe Buscaino, who is a LA City Councilman and former LAPD officer. Next, we have Kevin De Leon, who's also a member of the LA City Council and former President of the Senate, pro tem of the State Senate. We have Karen Bass, a Congresswoman who represents the 37th District and former Speaker of the California Assembly. We have Rick Caruso, who is the developer of numerous properties, including the Grove, and former President of LA's Police Commission. And finally, we have Mike Feuer, who is City Attorney and former member of the LA City Council. Let's give another round of applause for our candidates.
Wow. All right. Hope you all got it out of your system. That was the last chance to applaud until the end. No more interruptions. We want to give as much time as possible to the candidates up on the stage. And we want to just point out as well, we're here at USC. Many of us here have connections to USC. Rick Caruso is the chairman of the board here at USC and a proud alum. Karen Bass has multiple degrees here, fight on to you. And also Kevin De Leon is served as a senior fellow at the USC Schwarzenegger Institute. Great to have you back, as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say. I'm a USC alum as well, but it's important to point out that USC's administration had nothing to do whatsoever at all in terms of the editorial of this debate. They didn't offer us questions. Erika and myself are the ones who came up with and ended up deciding on all of the questions. And let's talk about the rules.
Yes, so the rules that the candidates have all agreed to is Alex and I will both go a round of questions for each of the candidates. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. And if that candidate is attacked, as determined to our discretion, they will get a 30-second rebuttal. And with that, let's get started.
Let's do it. All right, so let's start with the first issue, which is really surprising, homelessness. Polls show that it is the #1 issue on voters' minds. All of you say that we need to be more urgent about what we do. Many of you say we need a state of emergency. But Congresswoman Bass, let's start with you. What is one specific, tangible thing that you can actually accomplish as LA mayor when it comes to homelessness? How much is it going to cost? And do you have to raise taxes to pay for it?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. The homeless crisis, we have 40,000 people on our streets. I would declare a state of emergency on day one locally, but we also need the state and the federal government involved. I want to house 15,000 people by the end of the first year, and that's 15,000 above the ones that will be housed that are part already. And we can use a lot of existing money because there is money from the state, there's money from the federal government. We need to expedite the process. We need to have everything expedited. If you are going to build affordable housing on day one, I would appoint a chief. That person would report directly to me. I would access the resources that I have within the federal government and the state government. That housing chief would bring together all of the department heads, and we would make sure that this is the #1 problem because it is a public health and a public safety emergency, and up until now, it has not been addressed like that.
Councilmember De Leon, one specific tangible thing you can actually accomplish as LA mayor.
Let me say this, that I'm the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a third-grade education. My mother worked her fingers to the bone, spending the vast majority of her life taking care of the very wealthy. Now, I know what housing insecurity feels like because in my early 20s, I was homeless. Anyone on this stage can make big, bold pronouncements on the issue of homelessness, but there's one major difference. And that difference is that I'm already doing something about it. I built more housing opportunities in Los Angeles for our unhoused neighbors in the past year. I built the largest tiny home village in the United States of America, and I brought over $700 million in my No Place Like Home to the city of Los Angeles. The bottom line is this, is if we can build football stadiums and basketball arenas, we as sure as hell can build housing for our unhoused neighbors. I'm not a talker, I'm a doer on this issue. I'm about action on this issue. And I know that together, LA can come together so we can provide the roofs over their head. Listen, we got $12 billion surplus, about $2 billion are coming to LA. We got No Place Like Home, my money, which is $700 million, and we need Build Back Better from the federal government to get down to the city of LA because this is the epicenter of homelessness nationwide.
Mr. Caruso, one tangible thing as mayor you can actually do.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. The tangible thing we can do is in my plan, and if you go to carusocant.com, it's very well detailed, and we have it posted because it's a very comprehensive plan and concrete plan to build it. 30,000 beds in the first year, 44,000 people are living on the streets, they're living in their own waste. It's a terrible situation that we have. We have 14,000 beds already in the city, so that would get everybody a clean, dry bed. Of course, we got to triage and get into a lot of other details. But let me just say this. My grandparents showed up on these shores without any money and without knowing the language. What they did have was something much more important. They had the American dream. They moved to Boyle Heights, and this city, they felt, gave them the opportunity to realize that dream. When you have homelessness, when you have crime, and when you have corruption, you're dampening those dreams. And that's what's happening to the city. That's why I'm in the race, because my interest is to do what's best for the residents of Los Angeles.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Thank you.
Specific tangible.
Yeah, thank you also for having me, and it's great to see Rick Caruso here finally for joining us, Rick. Listen, let's be honest. What we've done in my district, I plan on doing with the rest of the city. I've saw 40% of the homeless are now housed in my district. And the tangible thing that I can do as mayor is activate the emergency response center, because we have an emergency crisis where we're going to be dealing with this crisis 24/7 instead of 9 to 5. And at the same time, we are going to build enough interim beds. My plan is to give the city council within the first 60 days a plan of 9,000 immediate shelter beds, and at the same time move on a no camping law citywide. We have to have both. But let's stop talking about the issue of housing. Okay, it's irresponsible to say homeless issue is only about housing. We have a drug addiction epidemic, dangerous meth. People are not in the right mind frame to say yes to help. And let's focus on a public health and public safety issue facing our streets today, and that's drug addiction and mental health.
Thank you, and we'll talk more about that throughout the night as well.
I think I was attacked.
Well,
It felt like an attack.
The light one.
Well, it might have been a light one.
That was a light attack, but I guess his point is, if you want to go there, is that you haven't been to some of these other forums or debates that have been happening, and we appreciate that you're here now. What is your response to that?
Well, listen, Joe, I appreciate the efforts you've been taking on the city council, but the reality is, and I'm sorry, I don't have notes. I didn't realize we were able to bring notes here. But the fact is, since you've been a city councilman, there's 700 more people on the streets in your district alone. So I don't know how you quantify success when the problem has gotten worse under your leadership. So let's just focus on the issues instead of attacking. You got crime problems that we have to deal with. You have corruption in City Hall, and we got homeless problems. I think that's what the people of Los Angeles want to hear us talk.
You will not find one dangerous large encampment in my district today.
Okay, we're going to go to City Attorney Mike Fuhr. One tangible thing that can actually be accomplished as mayor of Los Angeles on homelessness.
Elex, thank you so much. And I also want to thank your mother for the brownies for everybody.
Yes, that's right. My mom made
you should be happy.
Thank you very much.
Right? Very good.
Winning points with me already.
Yes, very good. So I wrote a piece 4 years ago for the LA Times that said if we had a natural disaster, we would have a FEMA field general here on the ground in charge of recovery. I wrote we have the equivalent of that disaster as homelessness, and there's no one in charge. My first day, that changes, reporting directly to me. Now, my opponents have borrowed from that. Let's go deeper. What does it mean to have an emergency response as though it were an earthquake? Well, it means having pop-up locations around Los Angeles where we have multiple services available. No more shopping around the whole city for a person experiencing homelessness. And I've done this as city attorney. That's the thing about this race. Experience counts. Other things, I want to change our street engagement strategies. We should be saying to people experiencing homelessness, the streets are dangerous for you. There's no place for you to live. We have a place for you, but there's going to be a choice date after which you can't stay here because our public spaces need to be safe and accessible for everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. City Attorney. Erika, to you.
Yes, actually, I'm going to stick with the issue of homelessness. I know it's a big surprise to everyone. But so all of you on the campaign trail have talked about encampments and the need to get people off the streets and into housing and into shelter. But as we've seen, particularly with some of the more recent cleanups, not everybody is ready to go. So in those instances, do you support, what would you do? And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Caruso, because I believe in an interview with my colleague, Elex, you mentioned that you'd be willing to use police officers to clear encampments. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you for the question. What I said was, I'm confident I can build 30,000 beds by the end of the year. We know we can do it. It's been done in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, and we'll use best practices to get it done. I'm the only one on stage that's a builder that actually knows how to get things built, so I'm confident I can do it. We've got a real problem on the streets. You've got drug, you've got mental illness that needs to be dealt with, and you've got people that want a second chance, and you have to triage it. You have to get people on the streets that understand mental illness and give them the help they need. You need to get people on the streets that help people that are addicted to drugs and give them the help they need. And you need to have training to get people back on their feet. What you can't do is say we're going to allow certain encampments to be in some parts of the city, in some areas, because then you'll never control it. So once you have a dry bed, warm food, you have the medical services that they need, you need to give them an option one time, you need to get an option maybe a second time, but a third time you have to move that encampment because you have to protect the communities that are being impacted by the encampments on the sidewalks.
Congresswoman Bass, I'm going to go to you next. You've talked about this issue some too. As far as using police and law enforcement to break up some of these encampments, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me just say first of all that I don't believe that you should ever criminalize poverty. I would never do that. The other thing is that people need housing. They need temporary housing immediately. I do think that there are just some things that you don't do on the street, and sleeping is one of them. However, I don't think that you just move people from one neighborhood to another, because if that happens, what that is going to result in is people who are unhoused all being moved into lower income areas, areas that don't have the ability to fight back either legally, and the LAPD is certainly not going to go into those areas. So you use street outreach workers, you work with them, but if somebody is profoundly mentally ill, they need support. So you can give them one time, you can give them 2 times, 3 times, but if they're hearing voices because they're mentally ill, they're not going to respond to that. And I certainly don't think that you arrest them. I do think the police might need to be in the background in case it's a dangerous situation, but I don't think you use the police department to arrest people who are in encampments.
Councilman Buscaino, I want to go to you as a former LAPD officer. What are your thoughts on police involvement?
5 years ago, I encouraged and tried to compel my colleagues on the city council that you need to have a no camping law that has teeth. Look at our city today, and I was right. We have been a city that has been enabling this behavior. We have been a city that's been a welcoming mat for the rest of the country. Is to come to LA, pitch a tent, take drugs in public, and not be held accountable. And my plan, I don't know, Congressmember Bass, you're saying that it's criminalizing poverty. Well, I'm saying, is it criminalizing poverty to connect people to services? Is it criminalizing poverty to make sure our streets and our sidewalks are clear and safe of encampments? Is it criminalizing poverty to allow people to sit in filth, to sit in human waste? That's not compassionate. My plan is go to saferstreets.la, and you'll see the plan. Is when a bed is available in the city of Los Angeles, the sidewalk should not be an option.
Yeah.
Yes.
Congresswoman.
It is not criminalizing poverty. What is criminalizing poverty is, I believe, your plan that says I'm going to give somebody 3 opportunities, and if after the 3rd opportunity they don't take it, then what happens? To me, the only alternative is then they're either going to be physically moved, and then they'll just be moved to another neighborhood, or they'll be arrested. My point is that we know that close to 50% of the people who are on the streets are suffering from health conditions. And so for somebody who is mentally ill, I don't believe that that is a solution. They might not be able to respond because of their illness.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to go to Councilmember De Leon.
Let me be very clear here to each and every one of you that it's neither progressive or humane to let Angelenos live and die on the streets of Los Angeles. Just last week at Toriumi Plaza in our very own Little Tokyo, we housed 108 individuals. Now, of course, we had so-called activists trying to obstruct us. from moving these folks from squalor to have a roof over their head, to have a shower, their own toilet, their own bathroom, a warm bed, clean clothes, as well as clean sheets and towels, and more importantly, especially for women, a locked door. There is a major difference, as I just mentioned a few moments ago, and that difference is I'm actually doing something about it already. I'm not waiting for a fancy title of mayor or my name up on the door to do something about it. Like I just said a few moments ago, I've housed more individuals than anyone has in the entire city of Los Angeles in the past year. I have built the largest tiny home village, not in LA, but the entire United States of America. 9 times out of 10, unhoused individuals, they'll take the housing immediately. We have to supply the inventory to make sure we can move them from the streets into housing.
Thank you. City Attorney Fuhrer.
Thank you, Erika. Well, first, I want to say what I said at the beginning, which is we've had some success in the city offering a choice date for people experiencing homelessness. We say we have a place for you to go. There's a date after which you cannot stay here. And that strategy typically has worked. Occasionally it doesn't. When it doesn't, in my view, we should be having a triage location elsewhere in Los Angeles with congregate shelter and basic services, and the person is moved there. But before I go on, Mr. Caruso, you indicated you're a builder. And I respect that, but I have to say, you haven't done much in the way of building homeless and affordable housing for all the opportunities you've had. Instead, you've opposed rent control, and at the same time you were building luxury housing and opposing rent control, I was standing up for tenants being illegally evicted and making sure that we were combating slum housing and working to improve and expand affordable housing. Those are stark differences. Campaigns are about comparisons. Voters are entitled to know. So that issue of the building thing, that's a great thing to say. It's a great commercial, but action speaks louder than commercials.
Mr. Caruso, do you want to respond?
Well, I do know how to build, and I've been on the other side of the counter when I've tried to pull permits, and the city is so overregulated, there's no surprise why we don't have enough housing. But if you want to just talk about facts and problems in the city, Mike, I'm sorry that you opened this door. Your office was raided by federal agents. Your office is under investigation, and you've got a senior person in your office that's accusing you of perjury, and you're standing here criticizing me for building one of the most recognizable and admired companies in Los Angeles, if not the country. And I just don't think that's the right thing to do. Let's focus on issues.
Yeah, go ahead.
Rick, I'm very glad you brought that up, because, again, building
I'm sure you are.
I am, because it highlights a stark difference between us. In my office, out of 340,000 cases that I'm responsible for and 2,000 laws that I've written, about 1,000 people in the course of my tenure I oversee, there was one instance where we uncovered violations. We made that information public. I hired an ethics expert. I published a report. And then I issued a series of reforms, in contrast to your leadership here, which has been to obfuscate as opposed to make transparent.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question.
Move on to the issue. There we go. of crime, another big issue for a lot of people. Councilmember De Leon, let's start with you. The question is, do you personally feel safe on the streets of Los Angeles?
Listen.
From a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being totally not safe at all, and 10 being really safe, really comfortable, how safe do you feel walking on the streets? And if you don't feel safe, what's something specific that you want to see different as mayor?
Listen, I would say a 7, but that's all relative to every Angelino, depending on their zip code and the color of their skin. I grew up in a neighborhood that had its fair share of violence, so I know what fear feels like. I think anyone can stand on this stage and ask for thousands of more police officers, and I think everyone on the stage has asked for an increase in the budget. But what they're not telling you is that if you increase the police budget to the numbers that they want, that's going to cost $1 billion over a course of 5 years. That doesn't include pensions or health care, nor does it include the badge or even a squad car. Before we get into increasing our police budget, we need to utilize our resources in a much more effective manner. We need to hire mental health specialists to get our LAPD officers off the mental health front lines and back on the line of duty to protect and serve. Every person deserves to be treated with professionalism as well as respect and dignity. We can better utilize our resources strategically in hot spots where we have crime trends and keep all Angelinos safe.
And we'll get more into the specific issue of number of cops in our next round, but City Attorney Fuhr, to you, if you had to do 1 to 10, 1 being not safe, 10 being really safe, how safe do you feel in Los Angeles, and what can be done on that issue of crime?
So I personally typically feel safe. But I know, because I'm going to every one of LA's 101 neighborhoods, the only mayor ever to do that, that people are on edge everywhere in the city, from San Pedro to North Hollywood. And how do we address that? We don't have this zero-sum game of either more police or reform, because we need to do both. I propose an increase in 500 officers to 10,000 and a series of reforms to make sure that our offices are embedded in communities that are distrustful of police for 5-year stints, to make sure that we sever from police officers' obligations interventions with mental health issues on the street that aren't violent, to be sure we have civilian ambassadors in our police stations, and to be sure that we de-escalate violence through training of our officers. And one more thing, Alex, we can't ask LAPD to do it alone. We need to complement that with neighborhood-based violence prevention intervention programs and cleaning up our communities. Just cleaning up a neighborhood has been shown can decrease gun violence by 29%. These are all parts of a comprehensive, sustainable vision of safety.
Mr. Buscaino, as a former cop, how safe do you feel walking the street?
Generally, I feel safe, but I'm not hearing that with my own family members, with my friends. Today, you see mayhem and chaos in the city of Los Angeles. We haven't seen these homicide numbers in a 15-year period. Everything hinges on public safety. I voted against defunding LAPD. And let me say this.
Just made some news there.
I voted against it. And the reason why I voted against it, because I expect to see, and I told my colleagues this, when we take resources away from LAPD, expect to see a spike in crime. In fact, one of my first actions as mayor is going to be to refund the LAPD $150 million. And I'm hearing from residents all across the city. I hear from Sam, Des, Stephen, and Los Feliz. They are afraid because they were dealing with a dangerous encampment with a known local gang taking over their streets. I've heard from the Melrose Avenue businesses where it was the epicenter of the smash and grabs. And then you have an out-of-touch district attorney who's not prosecuting crimes.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about him a little bit later, too. But let's get to Mr. Caruso now. How safe do you feel walking the streets of L.A., and what's the most important thing that can be done in terms of safety?
I think we all agree we have a problem in the city with crime. Homicides are up 50% since 2019. Vehicle thefts are up 50% since 2019. Shootings are up almost 50% since 2019. Here's the difference between everybody on the stage and me. I inherited a mess. After a Rodney King beating, I was asked to be the president of the police commission. I inherited a department, I reformed it. It was under a federal consent decree, got it removed by reforming the department. I changed leadership, went out for the best and the brightest, brought in Bill Bratton. We reversed the course of LAPD. And then what did I do next? I hired 800 officers. And then what did we do next? Community policing, senior lead officers. Officers were on the street. They knew the neighbors. They knew the storekeepers. There was trust. You have to have trust. And then what happened? 30% reduction of crime. I've done it before. I'll do it again because I know how to do it.
Congresswoman, do you feel safe walking in Los
I do
Angeles?
feel safe. I would say a 10. I feel safe, but I do understand that a lot of people around the city do not feel safe, and I respect that, and we have to address that. And when there is a spike in crime, we have to hold people accountable. On the other hand, I want to address the crimes of today, but I want to prevent the crimes of the future. And we can do that by investing in communities. In 1990, at the height of the crack cocaine epidemic and gang violence, we had 1,000 homicides in South LA at the time. I went to that crisis. I went right in the middle of South Central. I started an organization to figure out how do you organize the community to address crime? How do you prevent crime? And some of the projects and programs that we came up with years later have been replicated, they've been research-based, and so while I want to suppress the crime of today, I want to very seriously invest in prevention in the future, and in my office, I want to have an Office of Community Safety so we can prevent the crimes of the future and make the investments in communities that will do that.
Thank you, Congressman. Of course, she's referencing the Community Coalition in South
Yes,
LA.
I am.
Erika.
Yes, so sticking with policing and public safety, some of you just mentioned about increasing the size of the Los Angeles Police Department. I wanted to dig a little bit into that, specifically the numbers that have been cited. City Attorney Farrer, you mentioned that you want to take the force to around 10,000. Is there a reason why that particular number makes sense?
Yeah, so at 10,000, the city was experiencing a good level of safety. The numbers have been declining. As a consequence, the police don't have the resources to respond to hotspots the way they should. As I go around the community, response times in general are way down. That needs to change. And again, I think we need to be looking at expanding the police force and at the same time reforming it. We can be doing both things. In communities throughout the city, I'm hearing we want candidates not to the left, to the right, but right in that heart of where the common ground is. And that's common ground territory. As I mentioned, the police department can't do it all by itself. I began to delineate other elements of my public safety plan, including cleaning up communities, having teams that respond comprehensively across departmental lines when a park isn't safe, for example, neighborhood after-school programs, job training programs. These are all elements of what it means to be a safe city. And I want our police force to be diverse, and I want to have more college graduates in it, which tends to de-escalate issues of violence.
Thank you, City Attorney. And to you, Mr. Caruso, you also want to increase the size of the force, but to a larger size. What is behind that number, and how would you propose paying for such a massive expansion of the city's payroll?
So right now we have some of the worst crime we've had in the history of Los Angeles, and at the same time we have some of the worst crime and the most violent crime. We're 500 officers short, thanks to our career politicians, right? So you're going in different directions, and the arrest rate is down 25%, which means officers are not engaging. You have to change morale, you have to do the reforms, you have to re-engage the community. City of Los Angeles has a budget of $11 billion. I guarantee you, I'm used to managing budgets. I'm an executive, I'm a manager. That's the difference between me and other people that are running for office. The money is there to support the additional officers. And I also stand with our President, Joe Biden, who said, let's fund the police. There will be adequate funding coming out of the federal government, adequate funding coming out of the state government. There are more resources in terms of funds in the United States today than any time in history. But you can't put a dollar value on saving a life. I'm talking to families at St. Lawrence down in Watts. They're scared to have their kids go outside. That's just not right.
Thank you. Councilman De Leon, you just talked about increasing the size, not increasing the size of the force, but talking about mental health workers. How would that work as opposed to what some of the other candidates have proposed?
Let me say, to quote President Joe Biden, that's a bunch of malarkey right now. That's a bunch of malarkey. Let's be very clear about that. Because if you're going to increase the budget for the LAPD, what they're not telling you is you have to raise taxes, $1 billion over the course of 5 years. And let me underscore, that does not include pensions or health care, your badge, your weapon, your uniform, your belt, not even a squad car, health care. That's $2 billion over the course of 10 years. So you either have to raise taxes on everyday Angelenos who have suffered greatly from the coronavirus pandemic, or you're going to have to cut to the bone when we talk about much needed services for Angelenos, such as Meals on Wheels for senior citizens, after-school programs for children, as well as parks for every Angeleno. That's the bottom line. You can't have it both ways. And I think what we need to do is we need to better utilize the resources that we have. We're budgeted for 9,706 officers. Through attrition, retirement, we can restore that budget, or we can restore those officers today.
Thank you. Did you want to respond, Mr. Caruso?
Sure, I'll respond.
Well, I didn't actually mention his name at all whatsoever.
There was sort of a finger pointed in my direction.
That was pointing towards Mike Fewer.
That was Mike.
Yeah.
You shake hands when somebody gives you the finger?
So you were friendlier, L.A.
Leadership means finding the common ground, Rick.
There you go. I know that well. Thank you. Listen, I heard our president say very well, we need to invest in our officers and we need to invest in law enforcement. You were against funding the police. You were very clearly on the camp of defunding the police, and that's fine. That was,
I was never, ever.
Let him finish.
Let me finish. But listen, we've got the money to do this. And instead of taking a look at our city and saying the pie is only so big, and so we can only afford to do so many things, and if we're going to add more officers, we have to cut other things, why don't we focus on growing the pie? bringing in new jobs, creating new businesses, creating new revenue for the city. That's the way I look at it. There's enough for everybody out there, and that's the way we should run the city.
Let me be unequivocally clear so there's no room for ambiguity, any misinterpretation at all whatsoever. I've never articulated any form, way, or shape to defund the police. I've been very clear that we keep the police budget as is, not increasing our numbers, to better utilize the current resources that we have today so we can provide strategic policing hotspots throughout the city of LA so everyone can feel safe, because that's the most important job of a mayor, to make sure every Angelino is in fact, doesn't just feel safe, but in fact is safe.
Okay. I'm going to move on. Councilman Joe Busquino, what do you think thoughts about expanding the force and how to pay for it?
Thanks, Erica. Well, I'm the only candidate on this stage who actually wore an LAPD badge and wore a bulletproof vest and responded to your 911 calls for 15 blessed years, these last 10 as a reserve officer. Listen, everything hinges on public safety in this city. If people don't feel safe, they're not going to live here, invest here, raise their families here, do business here, and visit here. And why my plan to add 1,000 more cops on the beat is so that we put them in neighborhoods so that you see them, you feel safe, and when you call 911, they respond. And as mayor, I'm going to prioritize that budget of public safety. Also increase the number of gang intervention workers who are doing God's work in the city, working hand in hand, addressing gang crimes in the city of Los Angeles. And part of my plan is also to increase the community safety partnership program that we modeled in Watts and triple the amount of senior lead officers, which is all relationship-based policing.
Thank you.
All right, if you are...
One more.
Oh, sorry. Oh, my apologies, Congressman. Sorry.
Your thoughts on that, especially as a member of Congress. And
Well, I'm glad my colleagues heard what the president said. I actually talked to the president and worked with the president. And in the last couple of weeks, just brought home millions of dollars for specific projects to prevent violence in communities. I think what we have done over the years is we've divested from communities, we've shredded the social safety net, and then we dump everything and expect the police to pick up the pieces. What I would do is I would increase the number of police officers to deal with the attrition that has happened, but in order to get police on the street right away in the neighborhoods that want to have police, I would hire civilians so that civilians can do the desk jobs for those officers that can be on the police, because on the streets, because people in communities, some communities, not every community wants to have an increased police presence. Now, having said that, I think it's important not to denigrate people who are in public service, and all of us have done different things in our life, and we have maybe managed programs or managed organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you are just joining us, the time is 6:30. I am not Billy Bush, and this is not extra, but I think this may be more entertaining than the entertainment news. We are watching the debate, Fox 11, Los Angeles Times, USC Dornsife, all partnering, and we've got the 5 leading candidates for mayor of Los Angeles. We're now going to talk about George Gascon. We asked for questions from our audience. The number 1 issue was homelessness. The number 2 issue was George Gascon, the district attorney of Los Angeles. Of course, he could be facing a recall. Congresswoman Bass, Gascon was on stage with you at your launch event.
Yes, he was.
You've said you disagree with him on some issues. What specifically is he doing right, and what specifically is he doing wrong? Because I know you don't think he should be recalled.
I do not, because I think there is a problem with the recall process, period. If you're going to recall somebody, it should be because they have done some egregious ethics issue or violated the law. We have 60 recalls happening in the state of California. Where I believe is that it's very important to have criminal justice reform. We have problems in our system, but no reform should be so rigid that it can't be flexible and maybe amended or adjusted. And so when Gascon decided not to sentence the 26-year-old woman to an adult facility, I disagreed with that. When he said there was no bail for misdemeanors, I think that's a real problem, because what if somebody has committed domestic violence, or if it's a DUI? The idea that juveniles would get off scot-free if it's a DUI, that worries me, because for a juvenile to do a DUI, that is a cry for help. So I think reforms are important, and I do think that if you want to change an elected official, pressure them to change. There is an election that will happen in a few years, and he is beginning to change somewhat.
Mr. Caruso, you've taken a different approach here. You've donated to the recall campaign. What do you think about what you just heard from the Congresswoman?
You know, I sat down with George, and we had a nice lunch a few months back, and we talked about things, and I mentioned to him then that I thought his policies were hurting Los Angeles and making us unsafe, and that wasn't a fair thing to do. I asked him to review it. I very publicly came out and said to him, I think it was an interview with you, you need to change your policies or you need to step down, and if you don't do that, you need to be recalled because people are dying and people are feeling unsafe. And by the way, one of the biggest crimes in this city is people are feeling unheard, and their elected officials aren't listening to them. George needs to listen. He clearly hasn't been. So with that, I decided to contribute to the recall effort and then allow the people of this city, sooner than waiting a couple of years, and I respect Karen's opinion on waiting for the regular election. I think that's a fair debate that people can have. But I do think people are at risk in this city now, in this county. And so giving the chance to vote is the right thing to do, in my opinion.
City Attorney, you have said that you are not taking a position on the recall because you are the City Attorney and you have to work with him. What do you think he's doing well? What do you think he's not doing well? And what do you say to critics who say he is making life easier for criminals and harder for victims?
So the DA and I disagree in a number of ways. We prosecute misdemeanors in my office, tens of thousands of them. There's a different policy across the border in the county of Los Angeles because we differ. I believe that we should hold people accountable for low-level offenses as well. That doesn't necessarily mean a punitive response, but the laws have to matter, accountability has to matter, and I've had remarkable success with programs that turn around the lives of people who commit those offenses and reduce repeat crime, and that's my key theory. My key focus is to reduce recidivism. We also disagree about gang enhancements, about gun enhancements. I'm one of the leaders in the nation on gun violence prevention. We disagree about hate crime, or disagreed about hate crime enhancement until he changed his approach. At the same time, the members of this audience here and the residents we serve elected me to be the top prosecutor in the city and help keep us safe every day. And to help keep us safe requires occasionally collaborating with the DA. For example, gun violence is up 53%. I propose an 8-point plan to combat gun violence. It requires the DA to work with us to reduce gun crime.
Thank you. Councilmember De Leon, you've heard the arguments for and against the recall. Where do you on this?
Let me say the following. I think that recalls are a terrible waste of taxpayer dollars. We just witnessed with Governor Gavin Newsom's attempt to recall. We wasted $270 million. I've been in office at the local level for 1 year and 6 months now. And during that time, there's been 2 recall attempts against me for building homeless housing in my district, specifically in Eagle Rock. So the process, I'm unequivocally in opposition to it. If you want to recall someone, you can do it during the regular ballot, during the regular election. I do find it somewhat curious that on this stage that there's been one of our candidates did a major fundraiser for George Gascon for district attorney. And also, as you alluded to, he was on the stage with another candidate. Now he's been scrubbed from all the websites. You can't run away from who you're with from the day one. Want to be very clear about that. I'm against the recall, but he's going to have to do a hell of a lot better job right now to keep that job.
All right, so he's referencing both of you. Let's start with you, Mr. Caruso.
Make a little fun.
He's saying that you fundraised for George Gascon before you then fundraised for Jackie Lacey.
You know, I stand with Bill Bratton on this, Chief Bratton and Chief Charlie Beck. George Gascon was at LAPD when I was the police commissioner, as was Charlie Beck and as was Bill Bratton. He was a very different person and a very different thought process on how to prosecute crimes. Now, what happened with George between LAPD and Mesa, Arizona, and San Francisco when I agreed to give him a certain amount of money, which was not a great amount of money, but it was money, and then his policies started coming out, I did pivot, and I supported Jackie, contributed to her campaign,
yes,
and I support the recall.
Thank you. Congresswoman Bass, he's referencing the fact that you were listed among his supporters and then the name has been taken off.
Well, to be clear, my name and picture was on the website against the recall. I would never run away from somebody that I had supported, but if it was incorrectly put on the website, then it needed to be removed. and that's why it was.
Okay, now let's go to Council Member Buscaino. You were the first person on the stage to call for the recall. You've listened to some of these arguments now. What do you say, though, to the argument that this guy won the election on many of these issues, talking about these issues, and voters voted him in just like they voted you in?
Well, they were sold a bag of goods. Let me say, you know, what's going to be reflective of leadership? You have two candidates here who I didn't understand if they were with George or not with George. But let me say I'm the first candidate to come out against this and support this recall, because George Gascon's got to go. I'm not big on recalls, but when you elect someone to do their job, when you elect a prosecutor to prosecute crimes and he's not doing it, he's got to go. He's coddling criminals and not supporting victims. When, you know, you see folks on social media who are in prison who are laughing at these policies, that's an embarrassment. This is why Sheriff Villanueva had to go to the federal prosecutors to prosecute Officer Avalos' death. Who are we helping here? And as mayor, if I need to go to the federal prosecutor to file charges on murders in my city, I will do that. And I've always been on the right side of this issue. I'm happy to see my other colleagues join me.
All right, now we want to ask a question about the person you're hoping to replace. Eric Garcetti, of course, has been the mayor of Los Angeles for the last nearly 9 years. Cassie Esperanza, who is a USC student, is here now with her question for all of you. We're going to go left to right on this. Cassie, take it away.
Hi, Cassie.
Thank you so much for being here.
How are you?
If you could redo one thing Eric Garcetti did as mayor, what would it be and what would you do differently? And if there's one thing that Eric Garcetti did well that you want, what's one thing that you want to build on that he did well?
Well, let me start on the second question, and that's, of course, Eric Garcetti, the mayor, bringing the Olympics to Los Angeles in 2028. We will be on the international stage, but I'm concerned because we will be welcoming the world with encampments that are lining the streets, and that's not the city that I know and love. What I would do different as a leader in what Mayor Garcetti didn't do is he pretty much forgot about what was taking place on the ground level. He's a visionary. Transportation, fantastic check. Bringing the Olympics, absolutely. Raising the minimum wage, we supported. But he lost sight of what was happening on the ground. And when we had a no camping law, he watered down those protocols. Looking back 5 years from, looking back now over 5 years, the city is a mess.
Councilmember De Leon.
I think what Mayor Eric Garcetti did excellent, without a doubt, was move forward with LA 100, which is essentially Senate Bill 100, the measure that I wrote. It's accelerated 10 years in advance. Decarbonizing our grid, it's very antiquated, so we can reduce our carbon footprint as well as carbon dioxide equivalents. All that smog, that dirty air that our children breathe into our lungs every single day. That's why we have so many children in San Pedro, in Wilmington, in Watts, in Boyle Heights, South LA, Pacoima, and elsewhere, have those inhalers because they have to breathe all that dirty air because of tailpipe emissions. He did an excellent job. Without question, I believe, and you heard me very clearly and publicly, and he knows it as well, HHH. $1.2 billion principal as well as interest that we all as taxpayers have to pay for. The number of units that we have produced so far and the average cost around $650,000, going as high as $800,000. It is not sustainable. We have to be much more efficient and sustainable to provide much more housing for our unhoused neighbors in LA.
HHH was a measure passed in 2016 that was promising some 10,000 new units for a $1 billion price tag. Congresswoman.
Positively, moving forward with transportation, I would agree with my colleague on climate change and HHH, but I think that a weakness was not seeing the problem of homelessness as the emergency that it actually is. I draw the analogy with a chronic disease. You know, like if you have a high blood pressure, you know you're going to have it forever and you're going to be taking medicine. But if it's an emergency, you go to it right away. I believe that we treated homelessness like a chronic disease, and then it metastasized and got out of control.
Right.
So that's what I would say. However, though, I do believe that when the Olympics comes in 2028, and I'm mayor, there won't be encampments.
Thank you very much. And of course, the Congresswoman mentioning her past as a nurse practitioner, you can see some of that experience there. Mr. Caruso.
Well, listen, thank you, Cassie, for the question. There's actually, I think there's a number of good things he did and a number of things that he should have done a lot better. But I do think The good thing that he did is he did put together a plan for 2035 for sustainability. And now the question is, are we going to hold the departments in this city accountable? We have career politicians that a lot of times set goals, but they never then worry about meeting them. I'm going to be a different mayor. Make sure we do that. The downside was crime and corruption. I mean, everybody in this city, at every corner of the city, no matter where you live, what your background is scared to walk out their doors, is worried about crime, is worried about your children going to school. Like I started to say the other day, I was in Watts the other day at St. Lawrence School, listening to those parents worry when the sun goes down what happens. Children that sleep on the floor because bullets go through the window. And it's all across this city. We should have never let crime get out of control. And we have so much corruption inside of City Hall, very difficult to clean up a problem when you can't clean up yourself.
City Attorney.
Hey, Cassie, great question. So what the mayor did well was to put us on a path towards sustainability with regard to water and energy and transportation. But I mentioned earlier, it took a lot of frustration to get me to write a piece in the newspaper that said we have the equivalent of that natural disaster and homelessness and nobody is in charge. And that is something, again, that I think should have happened then. It should be happening yesterday. Should be happening tomorrow. It'll happen my first day as mayor. But I want to say something, Mr. Caruso. You know, you mentioned your budget experience, and it got me thinking about money. So I was the chair of the city's budget process when Dick Rudin was mayor, balanced, on time, public safety, public service-oriented budgets. Very proud of that. The New York Times and Wall Street Journal have written about wealthy people who avoid taxes and park assets elsewhere. You have, I think, a $100 million yacht that is registered under the flag of the Cayman Islands. I think that people here ought to be concerned about whether people are paying their fair share. I am. I'm prepared to release my taxes tomorrow for the last 5 years. Are you?
Mr. Caruso.
Yeah, that's a great question. Good for you, Mike. Good for you. Spent some time on it, did a good lead up. Good for you. Hey, listen, no, that's fine.
Yeah, Cassie and I were working together.
Cassie, fair enough, fair enough.
Cassie.
Listen, I've been very fortunate in my life. I do have a nice boat, and I do have a lot of nice things, and I started my company with one employee, and I built it myself with a lot of great people. So I know what it takes. I know what it takes to do that, and that's why I want to help small business. Hold on. I will release everything that I pay in taxes, including the taxes.
Let him say this. Yeah,
including the taxes on that boat, which I paid. But I will release everything that I pay in taxes. And believe me, I pay my fair share plus.
When?
Terrific.
When?
When everybody wants to do it.
I'll do it tomorrow.
So if all candidates release it, you'll release your...
When all candidates when all candidates decide to release what they pay in taxes, I'm talking about everything you pay in taxes, I'm going to release mine.
Is there anybody that objects to that?
No, I think the city attorney. I think the city attorney challenged.
I'll show the last 5
Mr.
years.
Caruso specifically.
All right, there we go.
All right.
There's some news. Okay. Now let's see if we can make some news on the issue of COVID.
Yes, let's talk briefly about COVID. So obviously, LA is coming out of the worst of the pandemic. Businesses have reopened. We've gotten rid of our mask mandates. We're able to talk. But we've seen cases spiking in other parts of the world, in Europe and Asia, and there's some concern that there could be a surge here. And there's still vulnerability here in LA, given the disparities in vaccination and hospitalization rates. So if we do see another surge, would you support a return to more stricter rules? And I'm going to just go right to left. So, Attorney Fear.
Thank you very much, Erika. So the answer is, if we see a surge, we're going to have to listen to the public health experts' advice, which I've been doing throughout this whole process. I'm very proud there's been no public law office in the nation as impactful as ours in going after price gouging and fake test kits and cures and preventions and defending the city's vaccination mandate, which I strongly supported in the teeth of the pandemic. If the health experts say we need to go back to tougher restrictions, we will do it if that means avoiding shutting down our economy and closing our schools and requiring masks on kids, because we need to be taking steps to prevent the worst from happening. If we have learned nothing from this pandemic, there was a discussion in the LA Times about the fact that there was confusion in City Hall about who was in charge. We have to be training people now for the next pandemic as though we were training for an earthquake or other disaster. We have to be assuring that there are concrete rules that are clear for our businesses. I did town halls with small businesses, uncertain what the rules were. They need clarity and certainty. These are all lessons we've learned from the pandemic, and as mayor, I'm going to put those lessons in place.
Thank you. Mr. Russo.
Is the question a mandate, or is that what, I'm sorry?
Would you, if there is a surge, would you support returning to stricter restrictions both for businesses and schools and?
Fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that. I have a company that was in the middle of the bullseye in the pandemic. Everything I owned was shut, day one. No view, no visibility to how long we were going to be shut. We had hundreds of employees, hundreds of retailers, hundreds of tenants, hundreds of restaurants. What did we do? We made sure that everybody got over the bridge together. We did not lose one small business on our property. It was a shared responsibility. That's the way I look at COVID, a shared responsibility. If the health experts say we need to have more restrictions, we should. You need to follow the advice of the experts. But I think government has two critical jobs. One is to protect people's lives. The second is to protect your livelihood. I think we did a very poor job in this county protecting livelihoods. 90% of the businesses in LA City are small businesses. When you made them close, you took the ability of people to make money to put food on the table or pay their rent. We have to be very careful on how we decide to respond to the pandemic.
Thank you. Congresswoman.
So when the crisis hit, I was chairing the Congressional Black Caucus, and one thing I've done in my life is build coalitions and collaborations. So I pulled together the Black Caucus, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, Native American Caucus, and we fought for and won billions of dollars to deal with the disproportionate way COVID was impacting our communities. And we sent millions of dollars to Los Angeles, hundreds of millions, as a matter of fact. LA would have been in a fiscal crisis without that money, and that money also paid for some of the tiny homes, home key, room key, etc. I would follow the science, first of all, but I do think that if we continue now to really focus on vaccinations in communities where it's disproportionately low, the next time we have a variant, and by the way, we do have a variant right now. It's a question as to how big it's going to be. The next time, it will not impact folks the same way, and so we probably won't have to do it. Now, in Congress, I also focus on foreign affairs, so we are focusing on getting millions of vaccines around the world. Until the world is vaccinated, we're going to continue to have variants.
Councilman.
The story of COVID-19 in Los Angeles is a tale of two cities. In one, LA, the poor got poorer and the middle class got smaller, and the other, LA, the rich actually got richer. Expendable essential workers treated like expendable workers, frontline workers relegated to the back of the line for life-saving vaccinations and PPE equipment. I'm not waiting to lead on this issue because I've already introduced legislation that will create a public health department for the city of Los Angeles. And I'll also invest historic amount of dollars so we can educate every Angelino in every language to make sure they are prepared for the next global pandemic and variant, because it is going to happen. Let me underscore and emphasize the following. My district, at the height of the pandemic, was ground zero, where we had the highest infection as well as mortality rate. Families were devastated. There will be another pandemic, be rest assured, but we have to be prepared for it, and that's why I'm going to create a public health department so we can cut through all the bureaucratic BS at the county and state level and make sure we get the federal dollars directly to the city.
Thank you. Councilman.
Well, first, I'm proud of what we've done in my district in response to COVID-19. I mean, look at us. We're together again. We don't have masks on. This emergency is over. Enough with these emergency orders. In fact, the last 3 months in the city of Los Angeles, in front of council, I voted against continuing the emergency orders. Look, we know what to do. We know what not to do. Vaccines are universal access to vaccines today. We also have universal access to testing. Look at our traffic. We're back at work. One of my first things I'm going to do as mayor, after, Alex, we refund the LAPD $150 million, I'm going to end the employee vaccine mandates. We are losing our police officers and firefighters to neighboring agencies. And at the same time, we're seeing spike in fires and a spike in crime. We have to end the employee vaccine mandate in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay, I'll try to get you in on that later because I see the Congresswoman shaking her head. But we're going to ask a different kind of question now, because not only are people here trying to understand your policies, I think people are trying to get a grasp on who you are, because this is such an important job, and a lot of it is trying to understand your character and your values. So, Mr. Caruso, I want to start with you. Name a member of your family that shaped your values and shaped your worldview, and what did you learn from them?
Well, actually many in my family. I was lucky to have a very close, and I still do, a very close family. I love my wife. I love my 4 kids. I'm grateful that they're here and they support me in what I'm doing on this, because I'm not looking for a career change. I'm in it because I love this city. But there was a little lady named Josephine Caruso who stood about this tall. And she came to this country, like I said, without knowing the language and without having any money. She married my grandfather. He was a coal miner in Pennsylvania. They both came through Ellis Island together. And the soot and the sweat and the darkness of that coal mining tunnel didn't dampen their American dream. And they believed it was going to be in L.A. But she pounded in our head, your faith, be committed to your faith, be committed to your family, be committed to your community. And no matter how little or much you have, how fast you go, reach back and bring people along with you that need help. And that was little Josephine, and I'm grateful to her.
Mr. Fuhrer.
Thank you, Alex. It's a meaningful question to me. My father was a prisoner of war to the Nazis in World War II. He and I were talking as I was pitching to him. I'm an athlete. I was pitching to him when I was a kid. I asked him why he chose his job. He was an educator for 60 years. And he told me in more detail than he previously did what it was like to be that POW. And he said at the end of the war, the Russians were coming to liberate the camp. My dad couldn't walk because of injuries he'd suffered. The Nazis wouldn't give him boots that fit. His buddies said, we'll carry you. My dad said, no, I'm not going to burden you that way. My dad said, picture a long line of POWs marching across all of Austria in the snow. I'm a half mile behind them, holding onto a little cart for stability. That guard could have shot me at any time, and no one would have heard the sound. We were so far behind. My dad said to me, I became an educator because I decided when I lived through that, I would do the most important work in the world, and that work was kids. I realized soon that he wasn't just telling me why he chose his job. He was telling me why I should choose mine, the most important work in the world, and that's service.
Yes. Councilmember De Leon.
That is Carmen Osorio Nunez. Like I said, youngest child, single immigrant mother, 3rd grade education. This was a woman who had the courage of her convictions to cross the border, to come to this country. This is a woman who played the role of both mother and father. This was the one who kept the roof over my head, the clothes on my back, as well as the food on the table. This is a woman who spent the vast majority of her life taking care of the very wealthy. This was a woman, without her, I would not be on the stage at all whatsoever. This was a woman, and to all the single mothers who are watching on TV, a big shout out for what you do for your children every single day, especially those women of color who work their fingers to the bone every single day. To all those nannies and housekeepers on the West Side, to all the hotel workers, and to all the janitors. Those women who are the backbone of the economy of the city of LA, without you, this city would crumble. And that's why I'm running for each and every one of you, not the wealthy or the elite, but the working people who actually make this city go.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Well, that's not a fair question. I come from a large Italian family. You want me to pick one person? By the way, they're watching, and for those, my family in San Pedro, my Italian family, all 500 of them, I love you, and thank you for your support. Of course, my mom and dad, but, you know, I hold my Nonna Rosaria's rosary beads. And today, Alex, I went to go visit her at the cemetery. She lived 100 years and 6 months.
Wow.
And Nonna taught me the importance of faith, of family, of service, of always knowing where you're going, but never forget where you came from. The immigrant story of her and my Nono Caetano, who came to the seas here in San Pedro, who fished. My Nono was a fisherman My nonna, my aunts, and my mom, they skin the tuna at the canneries. And that's, my nonna built that character on faith, family of service, and service above self.
100 years is a life well lived.
Yes, sir.
Congresswoman, to you.
I had two amazing parents who I wish could be watching me now. My father was a letter carrier. My mom was a homemaker. My father escaped the South, the racism of the South, in the Great Migration after World War II, and raised me with a commitment to spend my life fighting for social and economic justice. I watched the civil rights movement on TV with him, watching the news, and he explained to me about apartheid in the South and how bad it was. And I watched those people, and I decided that that's how I wanted to spend my life. Now, I never paid attention to making money. I spent my life fighting for social and economic justice and working on the very problems that we are dealing with today, the crisis, whether we are talking about homelessness or the root causes of homelessness. If I was going to make a career decision, I would have stayed in Congress. 9 times out of 10, I could have gotten reelected. A career decision would have been to move up in leadership in the House. I decided to gamble everything and come home because that's how much I love Los Angeles.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing those stories. I think we all got a better sense of who you are from that. It is now 7 o'clock. You are watching the Los Angeles mayoral debate here on Fox 11. I'm Elex Michaelson, along with Erika D. Smith of the LA Times. Erika, the next question goes to you.
Yes, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about housing affordability. And we've been talking a lot about homelessness in this debate, but there's also an entire group of people in Los Angeles who are living on the edge of it, or just middle class and just figuring out that the rent is just too damn high. Housing is becoming affordability has become such a major driver of displacement. So I want to talk to you, Mr. Caruso, at first. I mean, you're a developer. What do you see as the biggest obstacle to building affordable housing, and what would you do to fix it as mayor?
We are so short of housing. I mean, I think the estimate is 500,000 apartments that are needed in LA City. Some talk about 250,000. Here's the problem. We're overregulated. The cost of building a unit in the city of Los Angeles is more expensive. You take HHH that was mentioned. Everybody in this room agreed to get taxed, raise $1 billion. Here's what the career politicians, how they manage that and what happens in LA City. You're supposed to have 10,000 units in 10 years. We've got roughly 1,000 units in 6 years, and the average cost of the unit is $800,000. That's what we're going to give somebody to house them. If you go to a private enterprise that I met with is building it for $200,000. We have to untangle the regulations in this city, give incentives to build housing, reduce the taxes, reduce the fees, incentivize housing to be built for low-income folks to get them in their homes at the same time we put them in temporary beds.
Councilman De Leon, you talked earlier about the number of houses and housing units that you've built in your district. In talking about HHH, I think the going rate right now for a single unit is around $800,000. How do you lower that cost and to build more housing?
Well, a couple things. One is you're talking about your hard costs and your soft costs. You have stacked blended financing, which is a very complex financing scheme that is not sustainable over a course of time. But let me say, you can't let the free market forces correct the inequities that currently exist today, because if we didn't, we wouldn't have 41,000 people living on the streets. Incentives by themselves simply don't work. Listen, I rented a room with my family in an already crowded house. We rented a room under a house in a basement. So I know what housing insecurity feels like. It took me years to save for a down payment to buy a house in my 50s. You either have to be super wealthy or you're frankly super out of luck, because the median price of a house today is $1 million. The average rental is $2,600. And in fact, the average household income in the city of LA is $62,000. So as mayor, I'll mandate affordable housing throughout the city of Los Angeles. And for those who are first-time home buyers, I will supercharge a massively depleted first-time home buyers fund with federal dollars to make sure you have a chance to own your own house in LA.
Thank you. Councilman Buscaino, I wanted to go to you next. I mean, how realistic is what we've just heard?
Well, first, let me, this is a part of the program where we call, will the real Rick Caruso please stand up? He bashes HHH today, but he was the #1 donor in support of HHH by contributing $100,000. So just like George Gascon, I'm confused. Listen, we got to treat the housing issue. We've got to treat the housing issue like we're treating the homeless issue, and that is with state of emergency. And I will activate, like homelessness, I will activate the Emergency Operations Center and bring all the departments together. We'll develop a Department of Development Services where we have building and safety, the fire department, a Bureau of Engineering, a DWP, all in one department, one room, so we can streamline these processes. Because I know, you're right, Erika, the rent is too damn high, and I'm concerned about my son, who's off to college. I want him to come back to LA and afford rent. But today, I see the SC students here today. I'm really concerned about your future. How are you?
Yeah.
Mr. Grissom, do you want to respond?
You know, Joe, I love you, and we are old friends.
I love you too, Rick.
And you know, I could stand here and talk about your illegal campaign funds that you didn't want to return, and I could talk about the LA Times report about you going on vacation with your campaign funds. I don't know why you're talking about these things, Joe, because the reality is HHH was well intended. It was the career politicians that mismanaged it. I didn't manage it. You managed it.
Do you want to respond?
Let's talk about that article, that irresponsible article of the LA Times. The headline should have read, Joe Buscaino follows the rules. And those dollars are used for the purposes of taking your family when we get sent out to convenings. At the time, I was a National League of Cities president. And can we not, you know, to the moms and dads, our working families out there, can we not take your own kids and wife and spouse to work trips? I mean, my work trip is not on a $100 million yacht.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And to be clear, he was not accused of any wrongdoing in the article either.
Absolutely.
But hold on. But hold on. I'll just be 5 seconds on this.
Let's go back to the issue.
I'll just be 5 seconds on this. Just stipulate. The LA City Council is the highest paid city.
You know, you can't let the rich break the rules here today.
All right.
We have rules here.
We're gonna
Back control.
Yeah, we're gonna move on. Okay. Same question to you, Congressman Bass, about housing affordability.
Yes, that's what we were talking about?
Yes, that is what we're talking about.
Go, Karen.
I will tell you, my daughter, who is in the audience, I have been struggling with her because I want her to stay in Los Angeles. But she can't afford to because everything is too expensive. And so we know we have an affordability crisis. We need 500,000 units, but we also have a ton of luxury housing. As a matter of fact, I always wonder, who are all these people that live in these really expensive places? But we know that some of these people don't even live in the United States. Some of these people are just holding on to these properties, and that might be something that we need to look at. And obviously, it's the red tape. We need to do whatever we can to expedite building. We need to in my opinion, if you're going to build affordable housing, you should have a streamlined process. You should not have to wait in line next to somebody who is also building luxury housing, something that we don't need any more of. So I think that should be fast-tracked. If you were going to address the crisis of homelessness or affordability, you need to have everything moved out of the way so you can get the job done.
Thank you.
Thank
City
you
Attorney
very
Fuhrer.
Thanks very much. So first, I do want to say, Rick, you mentioned overregulation. I alluded earlier to the fact that you've opposed rent control. That's a regulation that has been a lifeline for tenants throughout the city. Now, I would say to the audience, listen to the balance of the answer, because you really need to get a sense of who has a depth and isn't focused on slogans in this. First thing, all my general managers who touch affordable housing, if they want to keep their jobs first day, I say you're going to cut the time it takes to do it. Second, we have a transit-oriented communities program that's designed to concentrate affordable housing on transit corridors. I expand it dramatically. Third, we've seen the pandemic strip office buildings of commercial tenants. We have available space. I want to pursue adaptive reuse in those buildings to transform them into affordable housing. Next, the LAUSD has seen a diminution of 300,000 students in its schools. We should be co-locating affordable housing on those school campuses. Next, they have a bunch of outdated rules in the city. There's a new model of living where people have apartment units with a bedroom and a bathroom off of a common area. That needs to be available here in Los Angeles. A whole series of other rules like that need to change.
Thank you.
Specific
Thank you, City
can
Attorney.
make a difference.
Did you want to respond to that initial comment?
Very quickly, thank you. There's a great difference here. This is obviously a 3 against 1 or something now. There's a great difference here. There's 63 years of career politicians on the stage, a lot of great ideas, none of which were implemented before they ran for office. So there's a lot of empty promises. Versus what we have today, rising crime, more homeless on the streets, and we've got more corruption in City Hall. It's got to be. Those are the issues. And the question is, who can tackle those issues and change the city?
Well, I think we all have to respond. No, we all have to
No, wait a minute.
No, we all have to respond. No, you can't have it that way. No, you can't
All right,
have it.
let's
I get it.
quickly to each of you. Go ahead.
You know, Rick, you're my friend.
We are friends.
But, you know, stop denigrating quote-unquote career politicians, people who have devoted their life to public service. Any of us that become mayor, you have to work with the city council. You, in your companies, you know, I imagine, I'm not sure, maybe you have a board of directors, maybe they're shareholders, I don't know. But in a democracy, you have, everybody is elected in their own right. And so the point is to bring our city together. Some people have dedicated their entire life to not making money, but doing public service, and they shouldn't be denigrated for that.
All right,
Not denigrated.
let's go.
Yes.
Okay. Listen, I would say, with all due respect, Rick, you know, you and I are two very different individuals, and I have a body of work that you can only dream of having. Okay? I made California the largest economy on planet Earth to legally commit itself to clean and renewable energy. I made California a sanctuary state, was sued all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. During the last 2 years of the global pandemic, you were concerned with your rents at your mall and $14,000 nights at your hotel, while I was out there knocking doors, giving vaccinations and PPE equipment and hot meals to everyday Angelina.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I understand why Rick is saying the career politicians. We have two candidates here, three candidates, and I have been swapping seats left and right over the course of these last 20 years.
Oh, you're
But listen,
joining
I'm
too?
actually, I've given up my last term to run for mayor. I could easily do 4 more years, but it pains me to see the condition that our city's in today. And as my experience, the proven track record, bold leadership, and see what we've done in my district, come see what this elected official has done in San Pedro, Wilmington, and Watts.
Okay.
Did you?
Yeah. So first, I want to point out, you notice Mr. Grisso didn't answer the question. It was a good pivot, but the question was about rent control. Second, what I want to say is, throughout every stage of my career, I've had a role and I've shaken things up and dramatically changed the status quo. Whether it's at running Bethsedec, doing free legal work for the poorest people in the city, or on the city council creating 311 and writing most of the important gun violence prevention laws in the city. At the state legislature, making sure that kids with pre-existing conditions had access to health care, author of the Homeowners Bill of Rights. Here in the city attorney, getting the ABA's top award in the nation for a public law firm. That's accomplishment, Rick.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on.
Yeah. I'm going to get our other USC student to ask a question. Chloe Hirth is here with her question.
Chloe.
All right, let's do this.
Los Angeles is our home, and this city is increasingly diversifying. As mayor of the city, what is first on your agenda, and what tangible action would you take to make this city more equitable for Angelinos?
Let's go right to left. City Attorney Fuhr.
It's a huge question. We have enormous gaps in our city. Do you know the average income, the wealth for a white family in our city is $350,000. For an African-American family, it's $4,000. That is an example of a chasm in our city. As mayor, I'm going to lead a major private sector effort to infuse resources into underserved communities when it comes to jobs and education and food and recreational opportunities. And I've done that before as a city council member. I want to continue that effort as mayor. Equity has many features to it. It means having a workforce that reflects the diversity of our city, and not just the workforce, but also the commissioners in our city. That's why going to every neighborhood in Los Angeles is so beneficial to me. I'm talking to people on the ground, from San Pedro to North Hollywood to Mar Vista to Boyle Heights, and those conversations are yielding one answer on this question. The city has to pay attention when it comes to more affordability, when it comes to buying a house, having a job. Okay, well, there's much more on this. This is one of the pivotal issues in our city.
We're run late. All right, Mr. Caruso.
It's a great question. Very tough answers. I'll just give you a couple of thoughts on it, and I appreciate the question. I think it breaks everybody's heart when you see people that are at or below the poverty line. And one of the biggest problems we have with homelessness is there's so many people that are on the verge of becoming homeless, and we have to figure out a way to stop that. The difference between those that have and don't have is not acceptable. You have to attack it with education. You have to attack it with creating jobs and opportunities in the city. You have to support small businesses so that they hire and not fire. You have to get people to move their business into the city to create opportunities. One of the reasons that my wife and my kids and I spend so much time with programs like Operation Progress down in Watts and Nickerson Gardens with those families, you educate those children. Those children grow. There's someone here today, lived in Nickerson Gardens, a perfect example of how you turn it around. Lived in Nickerson Gardens, graduated high school, went to Boston College on a full scholarship. Now is at SC on a full scholarship with a master's, and she's going to go back to her community and help. That's one example, but that's the flywheel you have to create.
Congresswoman.
Well, I am those people. I'm a product of LA Unified Schools and definitely had to have opportunities that were presented to me. I don't think equity is a tough issue. It's a perspective and it is a value. And it is a value that should permeate through everything that you do. And it will certainly be that way if I am elected mayor. That means in appointments, that means in city resources. We have a process now where resources might be divided equally. Sometimes equal, most of the time, is not equitable because there's some parts of town that need more, that need different, and we have to pay attention to that. I was able to pass local hire initiative that what that does is that prioritize hiring when transportation projects are going through, because prior to that it was illegal to prioritize hiring people from the neighborhood. So it's not just hiring, but it's also making sure that all of your appointments, and more important than anything, it's the resources, equitable distribution of resources.
Sure. Councilmember De Leon.
Thank you very much, Chloe, for that very important question. I love this city, and this is a beautiful tapestry. It's an amazing mosaic of so many different ethnicities, so many different hues from all over the country, from all over the world. But I'm deeply concerned that a city like Los Angeles is leaving people like my mother behind, especially during the COVID pandemic that has really exposed that raw, ugly side of the city of Los Angeles between the haves and have-nots. And that's why I'm running to become your next mayor of the great city of Los Angeles, not running for the super wealthy or the elite, but for the people who actually make this city go. Now, we need to transform our economy. We need to generate real jobs. We need to disrupt that school-to-prison pipeline that sends our kids, what was once CYA, Pelican Bay, San Quinn, send them to Cal State LA or right here to USC. That's what I want to do, give every single child, regardless of who they are, regardless of where they come from, regardless of which God they pray to, or the color of their skin, or their legal status, or who they love. Give them an opportunity so they can succeed and be productive Angelinos.
Councilmember.
I do want to recognize Rick and Tina for their generosity in giving to the people of Watts. I've seen it firsthand and really helping the most disadvantaged among us in the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Listen, you know, I've always said that a pothole in Watts is no different than a pothole in Porter Ranch. I, too, like my colleagues on the stage, will ensure that my general managers, my commissioners reflect the people of the city of Los Angeles. I can also tell you that as a police officer, and Father Boyle says it best, nothing stops a bullet more than a job. And what Pastor Shane Scott approached me with at Macedonia Church in Watts, he shared with me an issue or a bill in Washington, D.C. that will create a jobs guarantee program. And as mayor, I'm going to do all I can to make sure in the city of Los Angeles, if you need a job, we will find you one.
Thank you very much. We're now moving on to a round of questions submitted to us from viewers and also readers. There are going to be different questions for everybody because we're starting to run out of time because everybody went after each other. So,
No, wait, I didn't go after anyone.
we're going to start in a very nice way. Erika, let's start with you. So if we can keep it quick, that's better.
That'd be great. This question is for Councilman Buscaino. This question is from Kobe Bryant for life.
All right.
And I quote,
Instagram
for life.
Instagram.
Yeah.
How will you hold police accountable so they stop killing us?
Well, that's a deep question. You know, let's be mindful of the fact that our police officers are the angels in the city of angels. Let me say this. I, as mayor, one of my first statements will be this to LAPD. I see you, I respect you, I honor you, I got your back, but the moment you tarnish the badge, I'll be the first to hold you accountable. And that was a police officer that I was. The heart behind the badge, actually working my own hometown as a senior lead officer. And this is what we need to build that faith, trust, and confidence like we've done in Watts with the Community Safety Partnership Program that's now gone citywide. I asked the Chief Moore, we have Imada Tingrides, the Deputy Chief, who's now leading the Bureau. It's happening citywide. We'll expand on that. But it all comes down to community-based policing, that you have that faith, trust, and confidence between the community and the police department, just the same way I policed in this city.
All right, Councilmember De Leon. Rob from Instagram asks, how will you fight corruption among LA officials?
Yeah, that's a very important question, because the people of Los Angeles deserve a city hall that they can trust. They deserve a leader that's going to have their back, is going to hold other city officials accountable. I was elected to stamp out corruption in City Hall in the wakes of major corruption scandal in my own district. And that's what actually I've been doing. I made every senior position in my office to be re-interviewed. That's what I'm going to do with every single general manager. But let me say this, it's not just about a culture of corruption, but it's rather also to a culture of complacency in City Hall, a culture of do nothing, a culture of allowing the status quo to allow 41,000 people to live in utter misery on the city streets of Los Angeles. And that's why I've always been very clear. I'm a doer. I'm a person of action. I don't pontificate and theorize. I don't ask for blue ribbon commissions, more studies and more reports. That's why I built more housing than anyone has in the past year in the city of LA.
Got it. This one is for Congresswoman Bass. This is from Chris Mattman from Instagram. Asks, should LA have its own public health department?
You know, I think that that's a nice idea. The problem with that is that it would probably take 10 years to happen. And we have a public health crisis that's happening on our street right now. What we need to do is have far better relationships with the county. And unfortunately, what happens is that there's finger pointing between the city and the county, who does what. One of the things that I'm fortunate to have is a very strong relationship with the 5 supervisors, as well as relationships with the Biden administration and in Sacramento. And if we are going to solve our problems, then we have to have and leverage the relationships in all of those areas. It was unfortunate that the commission that just finished on homelessness, the city chose not to participate in that commission. Now, that's a real problem, because they came up with recommendations, and now what's going to happen? I don't know how those recommendations will be implemented or whether or not the city will actually participate. So I like the idea of a public health department, but just concerned about how long it would take to build.
Attorney Fuhrer, Russ from Twitter asks, who was your favorite former LA mayor and why?
Oh, Tom Bradley. So I was very privileged. My first job in politics was when I was a lawyer, very young lawyer, and the mayor's best friend was a lawyer in the same firm. He came over to see me and said, the mayor and I want you to be in charge of research and issues when I'm running for the governor of the state of California. It was a huge honor for me. And I got to know Mayor Bradley. I still call him the mayor. Then we became friends after that election. He taught us all about what it means to have that common ground I mentioned before, a unified city where people actually look out for each other and respect each other. He diversified City Hall and made respect the order of the day. I want, before we conclude, though, on the parent question, I didn't have a chance to talk about my mom, and I want to do it because she's probably watching tonight. My mom is 90 years old, and I do want to say very quickly, grew up in Boyle Heights. She was a kid. She spoke Russian, Spanish, Yiddish, and a little bit of English growing up. But she taught us when all her Japanese American friends were interned, and she told us as little kids, you have to stand up for someone when they're being victimized. A key lesson for me. Thanks for the ability to do that.
As a fellow Jew, don't ever forget your mom.
That's right. It wasn't a matter of forgetting, it was a matter of time ran out.
Yes, no, okay.
Now. Okay.
Erika.
All right, last question is for you, Mr. Caruso. This is from Cece Murphy off of Instagram, who asks, what would you do to stop companies from fleeing Los Angeles?
It's a good question. You have to make calls. You have to pick up the phone. As your mayor, I will be the biggest cheerleader for the city on so many issues, on crime, on corruption, on fixing homelessness, on removing encampments off the sidewalks, and getting companies not only to stay, but getting companies to come. It starts with the mayor's office and setting leadership and setting goals. The problem we've had in the city lately, honestly, is that we've made it so difficult to do business in this city. And that's why there's more people now leaving Los Angeles than are coming in. More people leaving than in history. That's got to stop. People aren't being heard. People are scared. People are frustrated. And again, 90% of the businesses in our city are small businesses. That's people that are working hard, trying to educate their kids, putting a meal on the table. This city needs to serve them. They don't serve the city. They need to pick up the phone, and the city needs to say, and the mayor's office needs to say, how can we help you live out your American dream and support your business?
Thank you.
All right, we're almost out of time, so do you think we can do 30 seconds?
Sure.
We try to do it? All right. We're going to try. Mr. Buscaino, you're a former cop, but the LA Police Union and the Chief of Police, Charlie Beck, and William Bratton endorsed Rick Caruso. What do you say about that some of the people that knew you the best
Sure.
endorsed
Yeah.
him?
Well, I mean, money's playing a big role in this campaign, unfortunately. But I have the support of the men and women who are actually responding to your 911 calls. I'm also proud of the fact, Alex, that I also have the endorsement of two incredible police officer unions and who watch over our 2 points of entry, the LAX Police Union as well as the Port Police Union and the California's largest law enforcement association, PORAC as well.
Okay.
So proud of that.
Mr. Caruso, we know this is a very democratic city. You've donated in the past to George W. Bush, to Mitch McConnell, to Kevin McCarthy. What do you say to Democrats that are skeptical about that?
I've also donated, I think, to everybody on the stage.
Except me. Except me.
Yeah.
But
Except me.
well, maybe that's saying something.
Except me.
The check is in the mail.
These folks.
But Kevin, the night is young.
No, listen, I believe in people, and I believe public service, as Karen said, is one of the most honorable things you can do. It comes with it a sacred duty to do your job and do it well for those you serve. I trust people to do the right thing, and sometimes people that I've invested in or donated to have not done the thing that I'm happy with. But I'm a Democrat now and proud to be.
Congresswoman Bass, you spent a lot of your life as a legislator, not as an executive. The city of Los Angeles is 50,000 employees. What do you say to critics that are worried that you don't have the management experience for that?
Well, what I say is that I had an extremely tough management job being the Speaker of the Assembly during the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and I was able to bring Democrats and Republicans together, and Republicans that voted for those budgets had to understand that it was the last time they would ever be elected to office. So steering the world's 5th largest economy in the middle of a crisis, I think is serious management experience. I also started and ran a nonprofit corporation and have run many other organizations.
Councilmember De Leon, in 2020, KCRW asked you about the concept of defunding the police. You were asked whether you support the idea of moving money from public safety to more public services. You said, I would be open to supporting that. There's no question about it. What do you say? Was that still your view?
No. What I can say is we can hire more mental health specialists. We can get our LAPD officers off the mental health front lines and back on the line of duty to protect and serve. At any given moment, there's someone who's half naked on the city streets in Los Angeles having a psychotic breakdown. And at the same time, you have someone who's a victim of gunshot violence or some mom and pop store that's being broken into. We need to get our officers off the mental health front lines and back on the line of duty to protect and serve.
City Attorney Fuhr, you were first elected in 1994. What do you say to people who say you're part of the problem?
First, I was little, and second was 1995. But that's okay.
Okay.
No, but what I say is that experience is what differentiates me from my competitors. I've been a lawmaker, but now I'm an executive. Again, top awards for that leadership. That is distinctive when we want to be hitting the ground running on that first day. We have no time to waste. And I would say in every one of those positions, I came in and shook things up with great distinction. I mentioned some of those elements earlier, from Wells Fargo to creating 311. That's transformative leadership based on experience, exactly what we need right now.
Now this is a lightning round of fun stuff. Quick one-word answers for each of you. Mr. Buscaino, first place you take somebody when they come to L.A. as a tourist.
San Pedro Fish Market.
Council member, best restaurant in Los Angeles?
Oh, boy. Right now, it's Bavel in the Arts District in downtown L.A.
Councilwoman, Congresswoman Bass, who's your favorite musician or band?
Stevie Wonder, same thing I told you last week.
Okay.
Good for you,
Mr. Caruso, what's the last TV show you binged?
I binged? Oh, my God. I'm not a good TV guy. I'm sorry. Tina, when was the last thing we binged? Help me here. Help me.
That's okay. City Attorney Fuhrer, who's your favorite athlete?
Athlete, Mike Trout.
Okay, and quickly around for all of you, what's one secret talent for you?
I have made cards for my family since I was 5 years old, every occasion ever. It requires a lot of creativity. That's 50 years worth of cards.
Okay. Mr. Caruso, now that you've done this for the first time, is it more fun running the Grove?
Yes, it is. I'm loving it.
What do you
I'm
know
glad
as
to
a
be here.
woman that's different than everybody else up on this stage?
What did you say?
Okay. I think we are running out of time. I was asking, as a woman, what do you know differently than everybody else? We are running
How
out
to
of
get
time.
along, how to build coalitions,
Yeah.
how to collaborate,
Okay.
how to help